Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Haley Thomas, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's presentation is being presented by Mr. Stephen Asbury. Stephen is the best-selling author of over 50 internationally published safety and risk management books and journal articles, and an HSE practitioner with almost 30 years experience gained from consulting, auditing, and training assignments in over 50 countries on 6 continents. Awarded the IOSH President's Distinguished Service Award in 2010, he is the PetroSkills Course Director for Health, Safety, and HSE Management Programs. He is a Chartered Safety and Health Practitioner, a Chartered Environmentalist, and a professional member of the American Society of Safety Engineers. Stephen, we want to say thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is now yours.
Well, hello, Haley, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, the world. We've got people from the Americas today, across Europe, also in the Middle East, and way across to the Far East. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and this afternoon, this morning, this evening, we're going to be talking about evolving HSE management systems to help all of our organizations continually improve in the 21st century, and I have no doubt beyond. There's 4 key areas that we're going to cover over the course of the next 20 minutes or so, and there'll be some time at the end for a number of questions should you wish to ask them. So please feel free to type them into the chat box, and if we need to do any preparation for that, we'll be absolutely ready. So we're going to talk about the essence of any enterprise, whether it's in our sector or any other. We'll go way back 2,500 years to the origins of management systems. We'll be looking at a good introduction to an HSE management system and how you can use them in your organizations to bring continual improvement in your operational performance. And we'll conclude the session today by having a short look at where auditing fits in to all of this. I think a really good place to start would be to consider the essence of any enterprise, and whether this is a small fruit shop or something very large and an offshore installation being built in a shipyard or refined in an area close to a coast. All of these enterprises start with a great idea, and the great idea is developed, and when that idea seems to be a very useful, to be a very powerful one, those entrepreneurs go seeking investors. Of course, if it's a small organization, the fruit shop, probably they go to their mum, their dad, their auntie, their uncle, and they borrow some money, maybe $1,000, 1,000 reals. And if it's more money, they probably go to the bank. And if it's a huge, large-scale organization, and I'm looking at the attendees here, we've certainly got people from very large organizations, you probably know that you get your money from international investors. So there you are at a stock market in Tokyo, Johannesburg, Frankfurt, perhaps in London, Rio de Janeiro, or New York, and you secure the funding for your excellent idea. Of course, it's also the first place bad ideas get rejected. So with the money, you now are able to purchase your assets. This may be a rig or a platform, it might be a ship or a refinery, or it could be the fruit for the shop. We recruit the excellent people, and with those people we develop our business plan and our mission, the reason that we're here. And I think that all of those entrepreneurs at an early stage of their development start to think about how great the future can be. They start to think about success, and that might be religious objectives, charitable objectives, it may be objectives measured in barrels or scuffs, or it may be measured in profit, in money of some sort or another. To improve their profit, they'll think about optimizing their effectiveness, and if they are profitable, if they do achieve their objectives, of course, mom and dad get their investment back. The bank gets the repayments along with payments of interest, and the people who invested in the enterprise in the stock markets of Tokyo, London, and New York are rewarded with a dividend. And of course, organizations have all sorts of other visions. You'll see a couple of them here on slide number 3. Things like happy workers, happy neighbors. They may, and increasingly this is the case in the 21st century, they want to be incident-free, spillage-free, injury-free, lost time-free, and absolutely the evolution of HSE management systems is supportive of that. So you see here the journey from the start to the future, the journey from the mission to the vision, and of course this is not just something that happens. Many organizations, there'll be a management system type of approach, and you see here the business management system supported by its components. The examples, of course, being the project management system, the financial management system, the occupational health and safety management system, and the environmental management system. And those management systems, of course, have to work in the normal situation when things change somewhat, such as startups and shutdowns. There are abnormal situations, and the smart organization in the world is also emergency prepared. And you'll see here how this circle continues and continues, and over the first year lessons are learned, and over the second year lessons are learned, and we continue to refine that model to make our systems stronger. Somebody's asking me a question already. Are all organizations as well organized as this? Well, it's as though they've preempted the slides, because, you know, whenever I look at the world, whenever I turn on my television, whenever I'm in an airport lounge, I pick up a newspaper, I notice many examples of organizations where things have not gone well. And I've just picked out a few examples, I think probably about 10, that we can talk about very briefly this afternoon. Time will prevent us from looking at root causes and details, but certainly back in 1986, something went very suddenly wrong at Cape Canaveral in Florida. And of course, the primary objective of the organization failed within 73 seconds of the launch on that freezing cold morning. By contrast, not all things go bang. You'll see some examples here of what you might call dripping tap type risks. Down on the equator, Chevron 20 years ago have inherited an organization called Texaco. There are allegations that there was disturbance of communities, allegations of pollution, and for 20 years that case has rolled on. Nothing like bang. And over in the east, we have an organization called News Corporation. I remember reading that 10 years ago, the actress Sienna Miller and her boyfriend, Jude Law, suggested that there'd been perhaps interference with their telephone answering service. And it later transpired that a news organization had been involved in tampering with those telephone services. The story was that they found the person responsible. He'd been fired, and would you believe it, 10 years on, that story continues to roll on. So again, not a dripping tap. Of course, we have some incidents that are extremely well known. I think 1989 in Prince William Sound, the story of Exxon Valdez and the intoxicated ship's captain are pretty well known. And on the other hand, we have some instances that are rather less well known. In 1995, the Shell organization decided on a deep sea disposal of the Brent Spar storage facility. And it's less well known that an environmental charity called Greenpeace boarded that facility and occupied it for 3 weeks. Absolutely a corporate disaster for Shell at the time, and it was reported extremely widely in the news media. Let's move on to some other examples very briefly. Let's start off with an example here that you might say killed many. Many people will know the story of Piper Alpha. There were 167 fatalities. This is back in 1988, and Union Carbide killed many thousands of people at 5 minutes past midnight. That's what the book about it is called, and that was in 1984. And by contrast with those that killed many, we have an example now of an organization that killed no one. The Baring Bank was formed in London in 1762, and it folded in 1995 as a result of the actions of a rogue trader called Nick Leeson. And pretty much what happened, Leeson's investments went very badly, and I know if I make mistakes, I tell my boss about them. Leeson phoned London and said, things are going really well, please send more money, and they did. And that second tranche of investments also went pretty badly, and certainly I would have told my boss by that point, and Leeson didn't. He phoned London and said things are going very well. There was nothing to stop this situation. There was no framework for control, and in 1995 the bank collapsed, unable to pay its debts, and Leeson went to jail. They say one of the toughest jails in the world, the Changi jail in Singapore. We'll pick out another category here. I'd call this the natural man-made axis. Certainly the Tohoku earthquake, I think 11th of March 2011, caused a lot of problems in Japan. Fukushima Daiichi continues to be in some difficulties, but perhaps not the best place to build a nuclear power station. And then by contrast, a completely man-made scenario. Some of you, if you're listening in Houston, I think some of you are, will probably know people impacted by the Enron scandal, as it's become widely known. At the same time, most of the people in Enron lost their jobs. Their auditors, Anderson, also really disappeared. And pretty much this was one of the principal features that led to greater regulation in this area. And anyone with a stock market listing in the United States will, I'm sure, have heard of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. I think the final piece that we should talk about concerns the BP organization. We call this the lightning strikes twice category. So BP Texas City is on the road from Houston to Galveston. It's in the area of the Johnson Space Center, for those that have not heard of it. But in 2005, quite a large number of contractors were killed there, and the outcome of that was that the chief executive of BP lost his job, and John Brown is no longer with the organization. And then 5 years later, the Macondo incident, many people will know Deepwater Horizon, and following that incident, Tony Hayward, the replacement chief executive, also left the organization. So the question asked was, does every organization make that transition? And as you can see, clearly it does not. I think it's worth moving on now, and we should take a look at the history of management systems. A question I get asked reasonably often on training classes is, didn't they have a management system to build the pyramids? The answer I always give is, if you want to know how they built the pyramids, you have to watch the History Channel, and you'll be variously told that it was aliens, and we're not going to cover that in any detail this afternoon. There's somebody very interesting that is accredited with the origin of management systems. We'll see if we can get a little picture of him. Here he is, and this is Sun Tzu, who's usually put in the Zhou dynasty in China. and his legend arises from a situation where his king tested him to train 180 concubines. Concubines not well trained in military operations. Sun Tzu appointed 2 of them as commanders, and as he started to give them orders, by all accounts, they giggled, and he took that as a personal responsibility. He said that the general is responsible for ensuring that soldiers understand their orders, so he trained them and gave the order again, and once again they giggled. Well, Sun Tzu had them executed. He said that once someone has been appointed as a general, it is their absolute duty to complete their mission. So he appointed some new officers, and as you might imagine, the maneuvers were faultless thereafterwards. And Sun Tzu has gone down in legend. His most notable book was first published in the English language in 1910, and we do actually have, as a free gift for all our listeners today, a copy of The Art of War. Haley will tell you towards the end of our session how to get hold of your personal copy, but this really is a masterpiece of strategy. There are 385 points set out in 13 chapters, and I'll share just a couple of those points with you. This is from chapter 1. Now the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple as the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations, for they will lead you to victory, or make few calculations, they lead you to defeat. And it's by attention to this point that I can foresee who is likely to win and who is likely to lose. Here's the second of those points. This is from chapter 3, point 18. Sun Tzu said, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither yourself nor the enemy, you will succumb, friends, in every battle. And the final quote from Sun Tzu we're going to cover, and this is from chapter 9, and it's point 45. It says, if a general shows confidence in his men and always insists on his orders being obeyed, the gain will be mutual. An excellent book. I commend it to you, and for those that would like it, a free copy later on. It astonishes me just who is interested in reading about Sun Tzu these days. So, the origins of management systems, 2,500 years old, and we're going to bring that story up to date, and we're going to talk about a most interesting forefather of management systems. Most people will have heard of Deming. William Edwards was his name, born in Sioux City in Iowa. I know some of our listeners will know exactly where Iowa is. It's the red square for those that don't know, and Sun City is in about the 9 o'clock position. He was born there in the year 1900, and extremely good at statistics, strong at school, went off to university, and when he left university was employed in the United States Department of Census. So he spent much of his early career counting land and labor and capital and taxation and demographics and the movement of populations, and something most interesting happened at the time he was 41 years old. Most people will know what happened to end the conflict of the Second World War, and you see the picture here. It needs nothing to be said about it. In the years following the Second War, Deming and other people from the Department of Census went to Japan and started to look as to whether Japan would ever be able to pay its war reparations. And what they expected to see, I'm sure, was rapid reconstruction, rapid redevelopment, but they were most surprised. What they actually saw was more attention to planning than they'd ever seen in their own country. Dimensions and sizes and tolerances and so on being discussed, and only when the plan was developed was there any element of implementation in that plan. In Deming's book, Out of the Crisis, first published in 1955, Deming says that he was more used to the plan being placed on the shelf after it had been written rather than being used every day in the implementation stage. By this time, he's working with his friend and mentor, Walter Shewhart, and they are looking at Japanese implementation and notice great attention to checking. Deming writes a lot about statistical process control. You can read about that in his books if you're interested. And when they had that check, whether it was measurements, dimensions, or statistical tools, that information was being used by top management to make sure that the next plan either was, as the previous plan had been, delivering excellence, or the plan was changed insofar as necessary to make it a better plan next time. And in the bottom right hand corner you'll see of slide 6 is what just about everybody in the world today calls the Deming wheel. In fact, were he alive, Deming would be about the only person that would call it something else. And he called it the Shewhart wheel after his friend. So there it is, plan, do, check, act, and many of the common management systems are built around this general skeleton. And I've redrawn this on slide number 7 with the intention that you can really cast this into your mind. Now we'll use this to analyze some of the common management systems in a moment or two, but here you see the picture. It's got the key 4 elements, and I predict to you now that the management systems of your own organization will map very closely to the 4 simple elements. A common question that I get asked on training courses is why does an HSE management system sometimes fit thus onto 20, 50, 100 or 1,000 pages? And the answer I've usually given is that HSE departments, universities, academics and regulators have replaced the simplicity of Deming and Shewhart with complexity and detail. So let's think about what it is we desire from a Deming type of management system. I'm sure that in most organizations, management desires to be in control of its operations. And I'm going to share with you a very powerful definition. This comes from a book that I wrote in 2007, and it concerns 4 pairs of words, 8 words in total. And let's take a look at what we've got here. So the first pair concerns having structure in our framework makes us much more likely to be in control than with the absence of structure. I always think of the opposite of control being out of control, and of course most managers would not wish to be out of control. And over all of the years we've noticed that organizations that have a structured approach, and actually the picture you're looking at there is the model associated with the International Environmental Standard, ISO 14001, and what we get when we use a structured means of control is a reasonable assurance that our objectives will be successfully met. And I know that commonly surprises people. They want me to say that using a management system absolutely guarantees success. Of course, absolute terms are seldom true. So in your organization, this may be a 99% success rate. It might be 99 times 10 to the minus 6% success rate. But a reasonable assurance in terms that you've mentioned that the objectives of your corporation, your organization, the mission that you've set for yourselves are achieved. And the final piece of that definition is that we are likely to thus satisfy the responsibilities to the main 5 groups of stakeholders. Now we'll take a look at those 5 groups of stakeholders in a moment or two. So here's the definition. A structured means to give a reasonable assurance of meeting the objectives and simultaneously satisfying the responsibilities to the stakeholders of the organization. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that we'd move on to look at how the simplicity of Deming has come to reflect a couple of the very common management systems that people use in the world today. And the first of those that we're going to look at is ISO 14001. It's currently in the 2007 edition. There actually are some changes going on. If anybody wants to ask me about that, please do. And you'll see there are 5 elements in the international standard. I remember seeing this for the first time myself and wondering where section 4.1 was, and the actual answer to that question is that it is descriptive text. It says something along the lines of an environmental management system has the following 5 characteristics. So we'll look at the 5 characteristics. The first one concerns high-level policy, and the second one concerns more detailed planning so that the most significant environmental impacts can be addressed. Also a review of legal requirements so our planning can meet those objectives. Onto 4.4, this section is called implementation and operation. Moving further round the corner, we come to element 4.5, which is called checking, and the final component of ISO 14001 is the management review. And I picture right now a knock at the door, and we have Deming joined us from beyond the grave. Deming would look at this and he would see in the green text, plan, in the black text, do, in the red text, I guess this is the easiest of all, check, and at the bottom he would see not a management review set of minutes that were filed on the shelf, but a management review that delivered a continual improvement in management system performance. A very good standard for organizations that wish to improve their environmental standards. If we step that forward, you'll see OHSAS 18001. I'll mention just a couple of international standards that follow this similar framework. Of course, with 196 countries in the world, we can't mention all of them, but in the United States of America, the standard ANSI Z10 follows precisely this framework. If we have people in Australia or New Zealand, I think we do today, Hayley, this follows the 4801 standard very well. And what you'll see here is the same numbers, because the standard was absolutely intended to follow the 14001 standard, and I'll just drop in those 5 characteristics so that you can see them again. And I want you to imagine that we now have a knock at the door and the ghostly presence of Walter Schuhart and William Edwards Deming. They would see plan in the green text, black being the do, the red one, simple again, the check, and then not a management review that leads to minutes, but a management review that leads to continuous improvement in not only management system performance, but in operational performance as well. Now, I know, because I've been, as Hayley said, around a bit, And I've done a lot of management system implementations. I've done a lot of management system audits. I think I've worked in 56 countries, and a common question says, how do we know how much control we need? I think it's a really good question. The little graph you see on the screen here, slide 11, has the movement of time along the bottom. It's not any particular amount of time. It's as long as you wish it to be. And up the y-axis, we have management maturity, and that usually evolves from the bottom, where an organization might be quite unaware of what is actually required, and its approach is thus shown in the blue box here. Of course, we absolutely don't recommend this to you, but what usually starts to happen is organizations become aware of the law, perhaps because of problems they've had, or regulators or insurers have visited them, and they become reactive to the law. So the law says A, and they try and deliver A, and the law says B, and they try and deliver B. And what commonly happens, and there'll be some people in our audience today that have come across organizations that have started to become very calculative. They have statistics for accidents and incidents, and statistics for lost time and contractor performance and audit scores and so on. And they'll be following not only legal compliance, but possibly developing their own voluntary standard. And as time moves on, we talked about that idea of time growing, and people say, what else can we do? How do we move away from reactive to proactive? They become much more systematic, and they'll perhaps adopt a verified standard, such as one of those that we've talked about already. And then the world's best organizations are together called generative in nature. They're generating good ideas and best practices at all time. And I absolutely commend this journey to people here. I've worked with many organizations towards the bottom of this ladder over the course of the last 10 to 20 years, and it's been just so rewarding to see them make the dramatic improvements using management systems in the areas that they've decided was necessary. And of course, the world is watching. I mentioned earlier the 5 groups of stakeholders, and some of these you'll perhaps find obvious, some of them perhaps a little less so. Let's start off with the people who gave us the money. So this could be mom and dad, it could be auntie and uncle, it could be the bank, or it could be the institutional investors. They, of course, have certain expectations for your success. As you'll have noticed on the world map, we looked at many of losses that have occurred over the last 20 years or so have been health and safety and environmentally flavored. They've undoubtedly cost mom and dad and the institutional investors money, and that's probably part of their core interest. I know employees are very interested in health and safety performance. Of course, it's employees that get exposed to the chemicals, it's their hands that get cut and trapped and burned, and employees certainly over the course of the last 10 years or so have become very passionate about environmental performance. You'll see this in people's purchasing decisions, and you'll see it in people's recycling decisions. We've then got a third group of people. We call them the business partners, those with whom we do business, and their interest is slightly different again. What they know is that when our organizations do extremely well, that their organizations do well as well, and vice versa. The fourth group is our customers, and customers do make choices. I'm a customer and I make choices as to who I like and who I don't, who will have the Asprey dollar and who will not get it, and they're becoming increasingly informed as a result of the fifth group. These are pressure groups, and we've mentioned one or two of them already, along with society, and really information has never moved so quickly as it has this year. I think I look at just about everybody in the world today and they seem to have a video camera and a still camera in their pocket or their purse or their motor car. So stories and news travels very quickly. And let's be clear, all of these stakeholders have different expectations. If we take just a simple example, I think we'll have some employees, such as me, listening to the film here, and if you asked me how much would I like to be paid, I'd say, twice, maybe 3 times as much. If we asked those investors how much would they like to pay you and me, they'd probably say nothing. Certainly a lot less than I'm paid right now. So there is a conflict, and of course if we ask customers how much they'd like to pay for their gasoline, they'd probably like to pay rather less than the investors would. So it's the job of management to satisfy the responsibilities to all of the stakeholders and not just one of them. Do you know, a common use of a tool, I'm sure many listeners in their own organizations will have their own risk matrices. The one I present to you here is an extraordinarily simple one. Along the x-axis, along the bottom, we have a likelihood of something happening. So the likelihood of this audio recording being less than 60 minutes is very high. The likelihood of it being less than 15 minutes was always going to be quite low. So that's the 2 extremes on that axis. And on the severity axis, well, we have paper cuts and coffee burns towards the bottom. And at the top, we have fatalities and multiple fatalities and all the bad things that we hear about in the media. And then we look at the characteristics of those 2 things. We say things that are low likelihood and with a tolerable severity are judged to be, well, tolerable, acceptable, and things that sit up here in the top right-hand corner. These are things that are highly likely or things with greater severity. These are things that organizations would tend to prioritize for action. And we have a little tool. We teach this on some of our training classes. We call it the 4 T's. And it's the 4 choices that top management has. Of course, the first choice they can make is whatever it is that's high risk, they can stop doing it. If it's a project that's being proposed, they may even choose not to start. The second choice that they can make is to somehow treat the risk. And you might remember that organizations that want to be in control commonly use a structured means of control for this treatment. So in the green bubble here, you'll see the 5 characteristics of the 14001. It's the same 5 characteristics of the 18001 standard, and it's application in a consistent way that gives you the best level of treatment. The third T, as we call it, concerns a transfer of risk, and many people will be commonly aware of the principle of insurance. So I know when I jump onto an aircraft, I often buy travel insurance. That's not because I want to lose my suitcase. It really is because should my suitcase be lost, I can get some new shirts, some new pants, new shoes, new aftershave or whatever, and that risk is transferred. But it's an incomplete transfer. I'm still inconvenienced by having to go to the shops and buy those things. I think another common risk transfer is the use of subcontractors, and anyone that's ever had a contractor cause them a loss will know that a lot of the blame still comes back to you. Certainly a lot of the cost comes back to you. The final T we have here is to tolerate the residual risk, and that doesn't mean to sleep easy. It means to be constantly aware, to be constantly vigilant of the need to make improvements wherever we can. A characteristic of one of those generative organizations is they live in a chronic unease about what might go wrong and try to think about it as much as they can. I think another characteristic of risk tolerance is in many organizations a higher level of approval is needed where the risks of greater significance to the organization and its objectives are noted. Haley, I've just noticed a couple of questions drop in here. I think you can do me a little favour if you would. Somebody's
Sure.
asking me about the OGP standards for HSE management. I think it's Mr. Sunil from Kuwait. Hello, Sunil. Thank you for that question. If you could drop our image, Haley, of the OGP framework into a subsequent slide for me, we can talk about that. And I have
Sure.
somebody called Gustav in Moscow. Hi, Moscow. Great to have you with us. Gustav wants to know about legal standards and the effects of legal requirements on the application of an HSE management system. There's that slide we've got, Haley, that relates to the conference of the parties in Doha, COP18. If you could drop that slide in for me as well,
Sure,
that
no
would help a
problem.
lot. Thanks. I think all I want to say for now is that there are lots of ways to assess performance, and I've given some examples on slide 15. Just about every territory that I've worked in has a legal framework. Some of them are extremely advanced. You'll commonly find that in North America, Australia. Some of the European territories have pretty advanced legal frameworks. There are company standards, and people joining us from companies today might well be familiar with their own company standards. I've mentioned the Z10 standard. This is the national standard of the United States of America. The ISO 14001 standard is held and owned by the International Standards Organization based in Geneva in Switzerland. And then coming soon, and I guess I predict this is so, is the integration of management system standards, and PAS, or PAS 99, the publicly available standard 99, is a standard that commonly gets used for those that wish to integrate. And I've put this little picture back down here again just to remind you that many legal frameworks follow the Deming cycle. Many company standards follow the Deming or the Shewhart wheel or cycle, as do national, international, and the integrated standards. Well, we've almost finished our journey. We said we'd talk about 4 areas today, and there's just one final area that I wanted to speak with our audience about today, and that is the role of audit. And a very common question is, where does audit fit in? We teach auditing, Haley, as you know. Our auditing courses run around the world, and it always seems to me to be extremely well received. And a common question goes, when are the auditors coming and what will they do to us next? Well, let's see where audit actually does fit in to a modern management system when it's working as it's intended. Well, let's start off first with management. You can see we've got a multi-ethnic group here, all the colours of the rainbow. I want you to picture that, listeners, as your management team. You can see that they're putting the puzzle together. This is their attempt at world domination of whatever discipline it is they're scheming and plotting about. And what I know about management teams is they know about risk. And one of the reasons I know they know is in many organizations there is a senior supported mandate for an HSE management system. A common point that people make about, for example, that first element, HSE policy, is, but Stephen, that's just a piece of paper. That doesn't really do anything, does it? And I always say in reply, well, so is $1 million. So is next weekend's winning lottery ticket just a piece of paper, but imagine how useful and powerful those two things can be. So management expects its line to implement certain controls around the Deming wheel, and from time to time management will support a small team of auditors, commonly 3, 4, 5 people, often not much bigger than that, to come along for maybe a week, maybe a couple of weeks. Again, often not much less or much more than that. And that audit team is going to have a look in their own independent opinion at the higher risk areas in the business. Commonly, auditors will take a look at the same risk matrix that the organization uses for itself to think carefully about the sorts of harm that can befall the organization. And the language for this is a risk-based audit. They won't be looking for paper cuts and coffee cups. They're going to be looking in that top right-hand corner of the matrix we looked at earlier on to find the most significant risks, as well as a stripe all the way along the top, the things that can really damage the organization, its reputation, its integrity, its reputation, and of course the safety of its workers and its partners and its environmental performance. So it's going to take its sample, and the output from the auditors will be a report that ultimately goes back to management, giving a level of assurance to them on the performance of the management system. I've noticed over the years that some auditors, when they find a really well managed company, and believe me, there are some great companies out there, listeners, they tend to start going down from high risk to lower risk in order to find something to tell management. I believe that's wrong. I think a team of auditors, if it finds excellent performance, should confidently give that level of assurance and should move on. Of course, the counter side to that is if in seeking to give assurance, it finds areas of weakness, the job of the audit team really, ding, 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 is to wake management up and bring this significant risk to their attention. It really may be that on visits to similar locations, they've seen possible solutions to these areas of weakness and might be able to give some advice or a level of recommendation. And we have this little phrase in the center here. This comes from a book that I wrote in 2007. If you ask auditors what are they going to do this week, they'll commonly tell you they'll audit. And that's to remind us, I is the independence. These auditors are no use to us if they just tell us what we want to hear. It's important that the samples they take are independent. I know if you were seeking a large budget, you'd give them bad examples. If you were seeking a big salary increase, you'd probably give them a range of great examples, and neither of those two may reflect the facts. W is well balanced. A team of auditors should really not be giving out more recommendations. I know some people will likely, listening today, have seen that the audit team think they need more training, more permits, more procedures, more this, more that, and I don't believe that is what an audit team should do. The level of recommendation should be proportionate to the risk, and the A here is it should be appropriate to the type of organization that's being assessed. Independent, well balanced, and appropriate to the needs of the organization. So I think we should probably take a time out there. And I don't know, Hayley, I know we've had some questions in. Have you had the opportunity to type any of them up so everyone can see them?
I sure have. Stephen, if you'd like to move right into that, we can start with the first question. It comes from...
You've done it already.
I've got it all ready to go. Yes, I've been able to capture a few. I'm not sure if we'll have time to get to all, but I've captured a few, and I was able to drop that slide in you'd asked for earlier. So if we want to just move right into the question and answers, you can see that Gustav here from Moscow asked, saying that you mentioned HSE legal standards earlier. Where do legal requirements come into the application of management systems for HSE?
Wow, that is a great question, and would you believe, to answer that question well, we actually go back earlier than Sun Tzu. We go back to the Middle East, and the Hammurabi Code is the original source of safety law. We can find it no earlier than 1272, before the Common Era, and the Hammurabi Code is well worth Googling or looking at your favorite search engine if you're not familiar with it, but you will find a massive information on what you might call safety construction standards. If we wanted to go back likewise to the first environmental law, well, the earliest reference that I could find was in 1304. So wow, that's a few years ago now, and our Queen Elizabeth I in the United Kingdom was addressing Parliament. Parliament filled up with dark smoke, and she said that perhaps we should stop burning sea coal whilst Parliament was in session. Oh, how environmental laws have moved on since 1304. I think the most common language that gets used in the environmental theme these days, and I know it's an interesting word in the context of our industry, is sustainability. And there's a good definition of sustainability. It comes from the United Nations. Brundtland was the lady Prime Minister of Norway, and in 1987 she told us what sustainability was. And that's the principle that the way we live our lives now should not compromise the ability of our future generations to live lives the way that they wish to live. So many organizations, many jurisdictions are seeking to develop laws that are promoting sustainability, and there's an example here. I think this is generally regarded to have been a good international agreement. Many people listening will have heard of the Montreal Protocol. It concerned the production and use of substances which deplete the ozone layer, commonly called CFCs. Some people will have heard of those. And as we moved on from 1989, well, the international community really started to work together. So Rio de Janeiro, 1992, over 20 years ago now. I just can't believe how quickly that's gone. And Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century, was a tool that sought to influence all the nations of the earth, signatory to that convention, to really start to think about environmental matters. And I think if we bring that principle right up to date, COP3, that's the conference of the parties. The third meeting was in Japan, in Kyoto, in 1997, and some countries agreed to a 5.2% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions based on 1990 levels by the year 2012. Of course, that's now passed. Conference of the Parties number 18 was held in Doha, in Qatar, and I know we have some people from Qatar joining us. This was the largest conference at all. 18,000 people turned up, and that same principle of reducing greenhouse gas emissions has been extended to the year 2020 now. And most people think that's great. We'll certainly hear more about that at the next conference of the parties that's due to be held 11th to the 22nd of November this coming year, and it'll be in Warsaw in Poland. I think the final piece that we should talk about is other adopted standards, and around the world we have international standards and national standards and company standards and industry standards and so on. And what we have found, I'm going to use safety as an example here, and Gustav, I hope you're still with us. What I've noticed in my research is that in every territory the number of deaths in workplaces makes a sharp turn downwards at the year of the primary worker protection legislation. So I'm going to give a couple of examples here. I'll use the United States as the first example. The OSHA Act of 1970 led to a sharp downturn in the number of worker fatalities in the United States economy. And if I come to my own country, the United Kingdom, the primary legislation on worker protection was called the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974, and we saw a dip on exactly the same gradient as the dip we saw in the United States. And I could mention others. We don't have time for that today. I challenge you to have a look at your own jurisdictions and compare the accidental workplace death rate with the year of your primary legislation. And I'll summarize by saying I cannot think of a single territory in the world today where that target has not been achieved. So Gustav, I hope I've made a strong case to you earlier. Please do identify the legal requirements that you have, and it seems to be in everyone's interests that we apply those standards, because in every territory we get to improved worker protection, and long may that continue. Do we have any more questions, Haley?
All right, Stephen, yes, we're going to move on to the next question from Aaron in Bakersfield. Aaron asked, do you predict further integration between ISO 14001 and OHSAS 18001?
Well, I gave a pretty long answer to the last question, so Aaron, I'm going to give a much shorter answer to this one. The answer is yes. I'll qualify that just slightly. Just a few months ago, the International Standards Organization very intentionally launched what it calls Annex SL, Sierra Lima, Annex SL, and just about every one of the framework standards for health, for safety, for environment. Some people will know of ISO 9001 for quality. All across this area, food safety, information protection, the next revision of those standards will be written in the context of Annex SL, and it means that they will all have a very common framework, and accordingly the integration of the two standards you mentioned, Aaron, is, I would say, inevitable for the organizations that wish to make that happen.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on, we have another question coming in from Zhu in China. I heard about some changes to ISO 14001. What's going on?
Okay, ISO 14001, as like many things, had a timeline. It was originally published as a British standard, BS 7750. It was adopted internationally in 1996. The current revision of this standard is 2004. And a year or so ago it was announced that there would be a further review. Think of it as good housekeeping. Aaron asked me earlier about integration. I mentioned Annex SL, and ISO 14001 is presently being revised right now in time with the intention of aligning it to Annex SL. My prediction is that you'll see a draft of that sometime in the very near future. You will probably see final drafts in 2014, and with a fair wind following us all, I would predict that the new version of 14001, the auditable standard, the implementable standard, will be around probably from 2015. You said what's going on? Well, many people at present think that the 14001 standard sits a little at the fringe of normal operations. And if I can leave you with one word to think about where they're trying to reposition 14001 going forward, it is the word context. And the standard will very likely require you to set the 14001 framework at the heart of and in the context of your own organization. I think it's interesting times. I would keep that as a search on your search engine, Zoo. And I think it's great to hear that Chinese companies are interested in environmental management. It really heartens me. It makes me feel nice. So good job, Zoo. Thank you for the question.
All right, moving on, we're finally able to get to Sunil's question from Kuwait. And Stephen, I was able to add that slide you had asked for. So Sunil asked, our HSEMS is based on the OGP HSEMS. Can you go over the relationships to the Deming wheel again?
Oh yeah, could you just drop that slide in for me, Haley? We should have something that looks like a blue and pink circle. I don't know if you've got it there.
Yes, yes, I've actually loaded it in. It's ready.
Great job. So the EMP Forum, for those that perhaps don't know, is a group of 40 companies from our sector, some of them in the upstream, some in the mid, some in the downstream, and some years ago they got together and said, let us develop our own framework. And I remember seeing this for the first time 15 years or so ago, thinking, wow, that's mighty complicated. And I then thought, well, let's map the Deming wheel against this and see if we can simplify it. So Sunil, here goes. Let's start at the top. The first element is policy and strategic objectives. And you may well be able to picture straight away the idea of that being a high-level plan. And I'm sure if Dr. Deming were to join us right now, that's how he would see it. So with a high-level plan, we're able to get organized with our resources, to sort out our documentation, and once again, that is a plan. The third element concerns evaluation. Now, what are we evaluating here? We're evaluating the risks and how we can manage them. We'd be using our risk matrix in here, as likely as not, and that makes it a planning tool. And then in the 6 o'clock position, well, I think of this as perhaps the easiest part. That too is a plan. So from 12 to 6 in a clockwise direction, we have what the Deming wheel would call plan. We're now into the 8 o'clock position. You'll see the word implementation. That's the do. Also in the same slice of pie there, we have monitoring. That's the check. And what should we do as a result of that checking? Well, somebody should meaningfully review it and drive the next policy and drive the next strategic objectives and the next planning. The two extra things you'll see on there, if you want to know how long it takes, I think you should look at the leadership of your organization and their degree of commitment. You'll see at the heart the driving wheel of the Deming wheel. Leadership and commitment can make organizations progress very quickly. And of course, the absence of leadership and commitment, the poor HSE people, well, they'll battle on and they might not get too far. The final piece you'll see sitting around the outside is the idea of independent, well-balanced, appropriate advice from a competent audit team, and you'll see the point in the 9 o'clock position where that's handed over to management for their consideration. The EP Forum, HSE Management System, 70 pages, but there it is in 4 words. Plan, do, check, act.
Great. Well, thank you again for everybody, or to everybody for joining us. That brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you, Stephen, so much for helping us out today. Unfortunately, we didn't get to everybody's questions, but if you'd like to send any additional questions to the email address on the screen, I will get those to Stephen and we'll get those answered for you. Also, thanks to Stephen for offering up the free gift of The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I'll be happy to send this to anyone that's interested. If you could just please send me an email, also to the email address on the screen, and I'll get that right over to you. Thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Have a safe journey home this afternoon or this evening.